Welcome to Twin Talk Politics. All right, hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Twin Talk Politics. And today we are so pumped to be joined by Minister Qualtrough, who is not only the Member of Parliament for the beautiful Delta, but also the Minister of Sport and Physical Activity for all of Canada. And a very special interview for both of us, as we are actually swimmers ourselves and having the opportunities to speak to Minister Qualtrough, who has won a number of world championships and Paralympic medals in swimming, and one of Canada's most influential women in sports. Is just a really, really amazing opportunity. And we have so many exciting and cool things to talk to her about. But first, how are you doing today, Minister Qualtrough?
I'm doing great. Thank you guys for having me on your podcast. Let's jump in. I'm super excited.
Yeah. So our podcast likes to start off with a tradition. And since we were so lucky to have an opportunity to speak with you today, we are wondering, and we wanted to see how lucky you were today. So we were wondering if you could take a 50-50 guess at who do you think is Jerry and who do you think is Jason, simply by the difference in our backgrounds.
No pressure.
Okay, so I pick blue for Jason, yellow for Jerry.
Oh, unfortunately,
that's wrong.
Oh!
All good though. I'm slightly chubbier. I'm Jason with the orange background, and that's Jerry with the blue background. No worries though. All right, now that you know how to tell us apart, let's just jump straight into the interview. So the first question we have for you today is that Jerry and I know how amazing of a person you are, all the amazing initiatives, changes, and hope that you really inspired and instilled in Canada. But for those who sort of don't know who you are, we were wondering if you could please do a quick introduction, maybe your amazing career as such an incredibly decorated athlete, and maybe how you got really involved and interested in politics in the first place.
Well, good question. First of all, I'm old, so I've got a bit of experience under my belt. So I grew up in Langley, British Columbia. Don't live too far away from there now. I was born with a visual impairment. I'm actually legally blind. I only have 10% vision with my glasses on and about 5% without my glasses. So quite a significant visual impairment, disability. But I was born into this family that did a ton of sport. So I always did sport all my life. My dad spent a lot of time helping me adapt my sport environment to the fact that I couldn't see very well. And then somewhere along the way, I found swimming. And at around age 11, I started swimming very seriously. Had done a ton of swimming before that, but really at 11, I started swimming seriously, and made the national team when I was 16. Swam in the Paralympics when I was 17, same age as Summer McIntosh, which was cool. Got a couple medals, went to world championships at age 19-ish. Wow. I think I was 19 or 20. And then back to Barcelona in 1992 for swimming. So really spent all my teenage years in the pool, and learned all the lessons that came with being part of sport, discipline, teamwork. You can't cut corners. You got to put in the time and do your hard work, like all those things everybody ideally can take out of sport. But being involved in the Paralympics also exposed me to a whole bunch of quite unique experiences around disability inclusion and disability rights and the human rights of people with disabilities around the world, which got me very interested in a career path that got me to become a lawyer, a human rights lawyer. So I saw exclusion, I saw discrimination, I saw what other people with disabilities around the world, the barriers they were facing, and quite frankly, the barriers that people with disabilities in our own country were facing. And it really inspired me and kind of set me on a path, not only to be involved in sport all my life, but to be involved in disability rights all my life. So those are kind of my two things that happened because of sport. Went to law school, went to UVic Law School, became a human rights lawyer and practiced law for a number of years before politics came calling, I would say. I decided to run locally here for school board in Delta, which put me on the radar, didn't win, but put me on the radar of the federal Liberal Party, and was recruited by Justin Trudeau to run here in Delta in 2015. And the rest is kind of history. I got elected here. They hadn't had a Liberal in Delta for 30, 40 years, and been reelected 2 more times. I've been in cabinet ever since. I was first elected in 2015 in various roles. But as you said, I'm currently in sport, which is a big passion of mine. especially the human rights side of sport and using sport as a way to advance broader kind of social policy or human rights. So yeah, that's my story, kind of how I got here.
Wow, yeah, that's really, really amazing. Our second question is kind of following more on the concept of youth. As you probably know, our podcast is really created by the youth for the youth. And our second question comes in two parts. So first, what do you think are the most pressing problems for youth in Canada as a whole? And additionally, what do you think are the most paramount issues for youth in your own constituency of Delta?
I think they're one and the same, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
So I think that, top of mind for young people. So I have a constituency youth group here that fluctuates between kind of 40, 50, 60 young people from Delta, from all the different high schools and from the feeder universities, who get together very regularly to talk about issues of concern, things that matter, things they're interested in. And then I meet with them and kind of download. And as things come up in Parliament, I kind of check in with them and say, what do you guys think about us doing this? And then I'm able to provide that perspective, both kind of broadly within government, like in Parliament, I'd say, but also at the cabinet table. I can say, hey, Prime Minister, I heard from people in Delta that this is ... And I think what I hear regularly from young people is affordability, of course.
Yeah.
I don't think that would surprise you guys. People are, worried about how they're going to afford to stay and live here in Delta. It's very expensive to buy housing. It's hard to find affordable housing. If you can find housing, it's very expensive. Cost of living, no matter how hard people feel they work, it doesn't feel like you can quite make ends meet. So that's what I hear, is young people having to leave Delta to be able to afford a good life. And that breaks my heart.
Yeah. In regards to that, specifically affordability, what strategies, motions have you advocated for or think Canada should adopt to really tackle the issue of affordability?
Yeah, it's a good question. And some of the challenges, of course, are across governments. It's a mixture of working with the provinces or working with municipalities. And so at the federal level, I think our leadership needs to be around framing the conversation or the agenda of the government to really be responsive to exactly what you're talking about. So, it's budgets that prioritize the costs associated with food, national food school food program. Sorry, that was a bit of jumbled marbles. But housing affordability, building more housing, so the cost of housing goes down. Federal governments haven't taken an active role in that in decades, and we have gotten into that business in the past 5 years. But there's so much more work I think our government can do. So we've got a national housing strategy.
Yeah.
Working with banks on mortgage rates, working with, oh my gosh, you name it, working on the national pharmacare. So making medicine and medications affordable / free, depending on where we are in this process. Right now, it's contraceptives and diabetes meds, but ideally to a point where people, our national dental care for kids and young people and seniors and people with disabilities. But next year, it'll be everyone under a certain income. So really targeting those financial pressure points, I guess, is how I would say it.
Yeah.
And then for me, of course, and I hope we talk about this, it's also been a very, very targeted focus on improving the lives of people with disabilities.
Yeah, for sure. We'll definitely talk about that a bit later. So as you were saying, definitely the national housing strategy, pharmacare, and all these amazing initiatives you point out really has the capacity and capability to really lower the cost of living for so many Canadians and really tackle the affordability issue. So thank you for that. As you sort of mentioned, another part of your work that Jerry and I have been so inspired by is that we know you've done so much for the vulnerable community of Canadians with disabilities throughout your entire career, especially your time being the Minister of Employment, Workforce Development, and Disability Inclusion. And really thanks to your advocacy and voice, a lot of the issues plaguing Canadians with disabilities have come to light. In fact, in our modern society, approximately 17% of working age Canadians with disabilities live below the poverty line, nearly double the rate of those without disabilities. That's why we, along with so many Canadians across the country, have been so inspired by your Bill C-22, the Canadian Disability Benefit Act, which introduces a financial benefit aimed at really reducing the poverty for working age individuals with disabilities. So we know it recently reached and received royal assent and now is law. So congratulations on that. And our question for you is, we were just wondering if you could please speak a little bit more on sort of this bill's importance to achieve equality and how Bill C-22 has a capacity to change really the future for young Canadians living with disabilities here in Canada.
Oh my gosh, we could do a whole podcast just on that one question alone. So let me take one step back, which was the Accessible Canada Act. So the first piece of law we did and this was more rights-based law for people with disabilities around removing barriers to inclusion that people face because of the historic kind of wrongs that have happened to people like me, is the only way I can describe it honestly. Is the Accessible Canada Act, which set as a goal to make Canada barrier-free by 2040, which feels a long way away, but there's a heck of a lot of work to be done. One of the biggest barriers to inclusion is financial insecurity. So as you said, the rates of poverty, particularly for working age people with disabilities, coupled with low unemployment rates, massive ongoing discrimination and stigma associated with what people with disabilities can and cannot do, has meant that people with disabilities, working age people with disabilities, are poor in this country, and it's shameful. We have a social safety net through the Canada Child Benefit that has a supplement for children with disabilities that it goes up until someone's 18. And then when someone turns 65, we have old age security with the guaranteed income supplement for anyone, which would include people with disabilities, but you're kind of on your own federally if you have a disability between that. Your provincial disability benefits, you age out of that when you're 18. So there's this massive gap in support in our social safety net. And that's what the Canada Disability Benefit aimed to address, right? Now, of course, it needs to be coupled with all this other work to remove barriers to employment, to create more accessible spaces, to address the stigma and discrimination and all the rights-based challenges that we face around disability in this country. But fundamentally, people are very, very poor and very precariously living, and it shouldn't be happening in Canada. So that was the motivation for the CDB, Canada Disability Benefit, which will now be paid directly to people. The target is by next June. So again, feels a long way away when you're living month to month, but historically, it's a pretty big deal. We don't think anyone with a disability in this country should live in poverty. And that's what this bill unapologetically tries to address.
That's really, really cool. Just seeing all the efforts you've done and being amazing spokesperson for individuals living with disabilities is just really, really inspiring. Moving on from all your amazing work in that aspect, another aspect of your life we found very, very interesting is your job of being the Minister of Sport and Physical Activity. And recently, Jason and I have been very, very closely following your Instagram and social media, and seen how really, really cool it was for you to be there in Paris, cheering on all our amazing Canadian athletes firsthand. We are very inspired, but also very jealous at the same time of your amazing experience there. So we are wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what it means to be the Minister of Sport and Physical Activity and what type of work you conduct in your position.
Oh my goodness. So again, a full podcast, right?
Yeah.
First of all, I feel very honored to be. I was actually Minister of Sport from 2015 to 2017 as well. So I'm kind of back in the role. After 4 years of being employment minister, I feel like maybe the Prime Minister gave me a little thank you by giving me back this role. I also think that sport is a really important source of national pride, source of national unity. It brings people together. It gives us a common language. Like, there's so much we can do if we do sport right. And a lot of the challenges we're facing in society more broadly, they play out in sport as well. So it's discrimination or racism or any of the challenges you would see, trans inclusion, like pick a hot topic in the world, in the bigger world, and you'll find that happening in sport as well. And so I kind of have a vision for sport where we use it not only to ensure that we excel at Olympic and Paralympic Games, because I'm obviously a product of that system, but to make sure kids have access to healthy, active lives that includes welcoming and inclusive and safe sport. There's been a safe sport crisis, I would say, in this country over the past 5 years. You've probably seen all the coverage around Hockey Canada or Soccer Canada or gymnastics. And there's been some quite awful revelations by athletes about how they've been treated within this system. So we need to fix that. And there's a lot of people who don't see themselves in our system. And so we need to fix that. So my focus in this role is to really take a good hard look at this kind of win at all costs attitude and change it to a winning well attitude. But I also think we have to be darn proud, and we can be super patriotic about what's happening right now. What just happened in Paris for the Olympics, it's going to happen in the Paralympics. Our athletes did extra. You should be jealous because I had so much fun. I'm not even going to pretend that I didn't, because I got to see 17 different sports. I literally did sport from morning till night. That was my marching orders to my team. If somebody wants to meet with me, they can meet with me at sport, because I'm here to cheer on Team Canada. I saw many of the magical moments that you guys saw on TV. I saw them in person. Athletes, I got to call athletes. I'm still calling athletes who won medals to congratulate them. Again, these are kind of my people, my family. So a lot of the space is occupied. Like I know so many individually, and so kind of seeing people who maybe I knew in different roles kind of come up through the system and succeed is a very big deal. And just I'm super proud. I'm a super proud Canadian. I love the maple leaf. I love everything that our country represents. I got to stand on the podium and have the flag raised above my head. And it gives me goosebumps now just talking to you all about it. I was the same age when I won my first medal as Summer was this year, Summer McIntosh. So it was just magical. And it kind of gave me hope. And I think the world needed these games. I think with all the uncertainty and all the geopolitical, just horrifying things that are happening around the world, with everything that's going on, the world really needed some joy. And I think the Olympics brought us collectively in Canada and around the world that joy. And I think we'll experience the exact same thing in a couple of weeks from the Paralympics. But I don't know if I could pick one moment, but I was there when Summer won a couple of her medals. And one of them, honestly, because I couldn't see very well, I didn't know if she'd won when she touched or if the other. So I was like, "Tell me, did she win? Did she win?" And then everybody started cheering, and so it was really super magical. But I saw a whole bunch of teams. There was the issue with the Canadian women's soccer team with the drone that played out, and I was part of the working behind the scenes to make sure that the athletes got the support they needed, because of course that was really tough for athletes, and Canadians, watched in real time them persevere through all that noise and make us so proud. But I could write a book on all these moments, because it was pretty exciting.
Just following on that and talking a little bit more about what you just discussed, I think it's clear that sports and physical activity not only affect one's physical health, mental health, but it's such a great avenue to discover more of yourself, find an amazing community, whether it be your community or just nationally, build resilience, overcome fear, all these amazing things. So definitely, I think more youth and just basically everyone should be participating in sports. But in Canada, youth sport participation has seen some fluctuations, particularly from things out of our control. So partially due to COVID-19, leading to a decline in some organized sports activities across the country. But the good news is that sports participation is rebounding. And we know recently in Budget 2024, there's more than $55 million to support all athletes, from amateurs like Jason and I at the community level to Olympians to Paralympians. So we were wondering if we could get your opinion on the current sport landscape of Canada, and we were wondering how this immense amount of funding will be used to not only ensure sport participation is back at the same level it was before COVID, but even higher.
You've nailed one of the biggest challenges in sport in this country is decline in participation rates. And when people stop participating, for girls, it's usually around age 12, 13. For boys, it's a bit later, but it's really worrisome. And so what we have spent some time doing, particularly in the past year, is figuring out, are we not delivering sport in a way that connects like it used to, or like what's the thing? Is it, and it's multifaceted, of course. So sport can be very expensive. There aren't sport opportunities offered in every community. Sport in Canada doesn't look like Canada. Some of the sports we're doing and that we're funding aren't the sports necessarily that the Canadians are playing anymore. We don't fund cricket like we should, even though cricket is a massive participation sport. Think of pickleball, right? Pickleball isn't funded at the national level by the government of Canada, but everybody's playing pickleball. So why is that the case? So really kind of digging in on how Canadians play sport, where they play sports, what the barriers they face, how we can continue to make it relevant. And I'll say that's a work in progress, that one. We haven't seen, despite, I would say, efforts, like we're going into our third decade of what we call the Canadian sport policy. And the first 2 rounds of it, so their 10-year policies, had as specific goals to increase participation rates, but those goals weren't achieved. And so we're trying to figure out what exactly is the thing we need to do. So Budget 2024 really kind of is laser focused on what we call our Community Sport for All program, but it's a program aimed to kind of provide finances, resources to local organizations who deliver sport for underrepresented groups at the community level. So again, cutting through the different layers of government, of national sport organizations, provincial sport, getting right to the grassroots, on the ground community organizations that provide basketball for Black girls in Toronto, or soccer for kids with cerebral palsy in Langley, BC, or whatever the example is, to really get at kind of increasing participation and removing barriers to participation. And those programs are, super successful because communities know what they need in their community better than we certainly do in Ottawa. So that's a big one that was renewed for another couple of 3 years, I think. Some investments we're continuing to make in safety in sport. So making sure that there's a system in place to avoid maltreatment, but certainly to address it when it happens. And then another significant bucket for equity, diversity, and inclusion, which is similar to the Community Sport for All, but it's targeted more at the national level to make sure national sport organizations who kind of oversee our national teams have structures in place and have programs that attract talent that looks like Canada, right? We want our teams to look like Canada, and they should. So so real kind of focus on grassroots and removing barrier to participation.
Yeah, that's really cool. Just starting at the grassroots level and building up from there is I think really great.
And of course that'll be self-serving, because the more people you have participating, the more people will filter up into the system and the more medals we'll get. So it's certainly self-serving even for the high performance side.
Yeah, for sure. For the last part of our interview, we're just going to talk a little bit more about issues regarding youth. So in recent years, there's sadly been a decline in youth engagement in politics. I think this can be evidenced by, lower youth voter turnout at polls, etc. So we were just wondering, coming from a minister of Canada, according to you, in what aspects can the youth become really more engaged within the political sphere and inject themselves within the political discussion of Canada?
Oh, it's so important. It's such a good question. Even as I've done this, I'm going to be 9 years in this job in October. And as I've seen the impact that having a youth constituency council has had, and it's not partisan, it's not liberal, it's not conservative. It actually is intentionally not partisan. It's political with a small p, because I want to know what young people think about the things that are happening in the world and in our country. Most MPs have these councils. I would encourage anybody to go seek out these opportunities, both from a personal growth point of view, but from an impact point of view. Very few people get to sit down with the cabinet minister once a month over pizza and tell them what they think, right? And these young people can get that kind of access to their MP or cabinet minister, if their MP is a cabinet minister or cabinet minister. I think that we need more civics in our curriculum. I think that we need to talk not just about how government works, but the work of government. So what, and it's again, not partisan, I don't need to know what your what your evolving political beliefs are, but I think young people kind of in elementary and secondary need to have the tools to understand what decision makers do and how the decisions are made and how they can influence those decisions. And so getting involved in, and then there are also like issue specific opportunities for young people in government. So the Minister of the Environment has a youth council. Well, the Prime Minister has a youth council.
Yeah.
But there's local opportunities as well. Our mayor here in Delta has a youth council. I don't know about our MLAs, but I would suspect they both do. I just can't remember.
Sure.
I just think if you go find them, they're there. The problem is we're not telling people about them enough, because there are definitely opportunities out there. I worry about low voter kind of turnout for young people. I think somehow the system has failed if people aren't actively engaged, like the things that people have fought for so long. At the very core of democracy is your right to vote and to express yourself in that vote, through that vote, and to tell the people who are making big decisions on your behalf. And by the way, we're making them on your behalf. We're not making them for you.
Yeah.
And I just think we got to figure out how to better engage and respect the voice of young people, like across the board. One of the things I did when I first became minister responsible for people with disabilities is, as that minister, I go down to the UN every year and do a speech on Canada's progress towards advancing the rights of people with disabilities. And since day one, as part of the Canadian delegation, I have brought 3 or 4 young people with disabilities with me to New York, to the UN.
Wow.
Because I thought it was really important to both have those perspectives as part of our team, but to show the world that Canada understands the importance of the youth's perspective in decision making. And what ended up happening out of that is we ended up having a youth summit for young people with disabilities. So with the Prime Minister. So we brought in about 140 young people from across the country, various types of disabilities, different regions, languages. Like, it was super diverse. And we had a 2-day summit on young people, on youth, on issues facing youth. And I would say every issue that we have has a youth aspect, just like I would say that about disability. But it was really cool. Like, they got 2 hours with the PM and they grilled him pretty hard about what is he doing. And that's, so I think every minister should do that as a matter of course. And I think our country will be better for it.
Yeah. Just a second last question before our final question. Talking a little bit more about, youth voting, what are your opinions on the voting age of Canada? Do you potentially think if we lower the voting age to 16, it will spur more youth engagement as more youth are inclined to vote?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I thought a lot about it. I kind of have over time evolved in my thinking. I'm a problem solver, so I want to be really clear what is the challenge we're trying to address, and then the how kind of comes from that. So is the challenge low voter turnout from age 18 to 25? Or is it we have lots of people voting in those ages, but we really think younger people than 18 should be voting, right? Because we're not going to solve necessarily the 18 to 25 participation, although we could. But I'm trying to figure out what exactly we're trying to achieve by going to a younger age. I'm completely open to doing it for sure. But I think that when you make a policy choice like that, it's not made in isolation, and good government can't do that without putting in place all the things around that would be required. So education, resources, capacity building, maybe more tools in schools. Like, what are the things that people can, if you give someone that right, which is their right at 18, how do we make sure that they make informed choices? Who is it what's the thing we're trying to achieve through this? And people have different answers to that question. But I'm certainly open to it. I mean, I have older children who my son got to vote for the first time in my first election. So he turned 18 like 2 days after, no, the second election. He turned 18 2 days after my first election, and then got to vote in the next one. But and my youngest daughter is now 14. And I think that, I think she'd have something to say in 2 years that would matter. But I think we also have to educate people, and it's unfair to do one without the other.
Yeah, sure. I think it's really cool just to see, like, we need to recognize the prerequisites to vote and equipping our voters to vote properly. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, informedly, right? And I think young people are incredibly bright and smart, have a lot of capacity, and we often underestimate that. you guys know, like your generation in particular knows how to find information.
Yeah.
And knows how to, many of you, I would say, I don't know if everybody, but a lot I see know how to kind of get to the bottom of things because you're good at fact finding. So, but I think we have to give people the facts, right? And part of that would be media, would be, I don't even know, like there'd be so much to do around it, but I don't think we shouldn't do it.
For sure. Great. Yeah. For our last and fun question, is that if you could give one piece of advice to all young Canadians, what would your quick and brief message be?
Well, first of all, I think you live in a very exciting times. As a human rights lawyer, I think we've come so far and we've got so far to go. But I think you don't have to have it all figured out right now. I think with hard work and being open-minded, you can achieve great things. And I would just encourage people to take the path that is true to you, not the path maybe that people expect of you. And be prepared to change your mind. You're going to have lots of opportunities in your life that you won't see coming, and to bravely seize an opportunity, it will yield incredible results. That's literally how I've lived my life, and I can't complain at all about the choices I've made.
Yeah, great. Yeah, that was really, really inspiring. So thanks again for that advice. All right, that concludes our interview today. Again, Jerry and I would like to extend a huge, huge thank you to Minister Qualtrough and her phenomenal team for this amazing opportunity and taking the time out of her very, very, very busy schedule to meet with us today. We truly, truly appreciate it. I know Jerry and I learned so much, been so inspired throughout this conversation, and I'm sure all the viewers at home will be as well. So for all the viewers at home, if you guys wish to see more interviews like this, be sure to tune into future episodes. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you guys next time.